Blake Lively is under fire after filing a motion for a protective order to block the release of her text messages with Taylor Swift. In the motion, Lively argues that these communications are irrelevant to the case, claiming Swift has no material connection to her legal dispute with Wayfair. However, this move has been met with fierce resistance from Wayfair's legal team, who say Lively herself brought Taylor into the lawsuit by identifying her as a witness in official court disclosures. They argue that any communication between Lively and Swift could shed light on the alleged misconduct surrounding the film It Ends With Us, particularly since Lively previously stated that Swift was closely involved throughout the movie's development. Critics see the protective order as a strategic attempt to dodge discovery obligations, especially since Lively's public stance blames Wayfair for dragging Swift into the case, despite evidence that Lively named her in amended disclosures. This apparent contradiction has fueled accusations that Lively is playing legal games to shape public perception while concealing potentially damaging evidence. In direct response to Blake Lively's protective order, Wayfair's attorney Kevin Fritz filed a scathing cross-motion to compel, accusing Lively of producing virtually no evidence to support her claims. The motion reveals that Lively has failed to hand over critical documents related to sexual harassment, retaliation, and her alleged emotional and financial damages, despite being legally obligated to do so. Notably, Fritz emphasized that Lively listed Taylor Swift in her initial and amended disclosures as someone with first-hand knowledge of events related to the lawsuit. Yet, Lively is refusing to turn over any communication with Swift, even though such messages are considered discoverable and directly relevant, especially given Lively's public claims of emotional distress. Wayfair also included social evidence, like a photo of Swift and Lively dining together after the alleged incidents, to challenge the credibility of Lively's distress claims. The legal team asserts that Lively is attempting to weaponize Swift's celebrity status to shield herself from producing evidence, an argument they say has no legal merit. Their motion also points out that neither Swift nor her legal team has provided any of the communications in question, contradicting Lively's suggestion that Wayfair already had access to them. Wayfair's legal filings further allege that Blake Lively deliberately misrepresented the status of discovery talks. According to attorney Kevin Fritz, Lively's legal team falsely claimed that Wayfair refused to meet and confer over the disputed documents. In reality, Wayfair had already scheduled a meeting for June 13th to discuss her communications with Taylor Swift and other key evidence. But just minutes before that meeting, Lively filed her motion for a protective order, effectively dodging the conversation. During the call, her attorneys refused to discuss any of the contested requests, despite prior agreements and court rules requiring such cooperation. Wayfair's legal team says this behavior fits a pattern. Lively demands transparency from others while stonewalling discovery herself. They accuse her of rushing to the court not to protect privacy, but to control public narrative and avoid revealing potentially damaging material. Her tactic, they argue, is not just obstructionist but strategic, using court filings as a PR shield while claiming victimhood in the media. Wayfair's attorneys now seek a court order to force Lively to comply with discovery obligations she's repeatedly delayed or denied. Blake Lively's refusal to hand over key documents is drawing more scrutiny as Wayfair challenges the credibility of her emotional distress claims. Although Lively withdrew her formal charges of intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress, she still alleges that she suffers from garden-variety emotional harm, including humiliation, mental anguish, and anxiety, as part of her retaliation and harassment claims. Wayfair argues that if she socialized with Taylor Swift after the alleged incidents, any related communications could directly contradict those claims. They cite legal precedent where courts required plaintiffs to disclose private messages with friends that might shed light on their emotional state. In Lively's case, her own court filings and public statements have painted Swift as a confidant there every step of the way. This makes their conversations especially relevant, according to Wayfair, who say these texts could either validate or completely undermine her allegations. The defense maintains that Lively cannot selectively claim emotional harm while blocking access to the very evidence that could test its validity, particularly when she herself identified Swift as a witness with knowledge of the case. A major inconsistency has surfaced in Blake Lively's legal strategy. She publicly blames Wayfair for dragging Taylor Swift into the lawsuit, yet her own amended disclosures, submitted just a week before filing for the protective order, list Swift as someone with significant knowledge of the events in question. In these disclosures, Lively claims Swift was aware of details involving the production, editing, marketing, and alleged retaliation tied to the film It Ends With Us. This directly contradicts Swift's public stance of having no involvement. Wayfair's legal team pointed out that Lively certified these disclosures as complete and accurate through her attorneys, signaling that Swift was not a peripheral figure but a key witness. The contradiction has led to renewed accusations that Lively is manipulating the court and the media, on one hand using Swift's name to strengthen her case, and on the other attempting to block any discovery that might reveal inconvenient truths. This dual narrative is now at the center of Wayfair's push to compel full disclosure, as they argue that Lively cannot have it both ways, invoking Swift to support her claims while simultaneously refusing to provide communications that may discredit them. Blake Lively's legal argument hinges on the claim that Wayfair already has communications between her and Taylor Swift, implying there's no need for her to turn over anything further. But Wayfair's legal team flatly denies this. According to a declaration by attorney Kevin Fritz, neither Swift nor her legal counsel has provided any direct communications between Swift and Lively to the defendants. In fact, Swift's attorney confirmed on May 22, 2025, that no such documents had been turned over. Wayfair argues that even if Swift had provided any relevant materials, that wouldn't exempt Lively from her own obligation to produce documents under Rule 34 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Simply put, one party's possession of documents doesn't relieve another from disclosing what they independently hold. Wayfair asserts that Lively's refusal is legally baseless and appears to be an attempt to avoid producing potentially damaging evidence, especially since she herself claimed Swift had insider knowledge about the case. The defense believes Lively is using this misleading argument to stall discovery and deflect attention from her non-compliance. Wayfair's cross-motion also highlights that Blake Lively hasn't produced a single document from her own files related to the core claims of the case. This includes communications tied to sexual harassment allegations, retaliation, and damages, despite repeated demands and months of delay. Notably, Wayfair points out that any documents they've received have come from third parties like Sony Pictures and WME, Lively's talent agency, not from Lively herself. They argue that Lively cannot rely on outside parties to meet her legal discovery obligations. In fact, Lively's only contribution so far has been a limited set of documents obtained through her company, Van Zandt Inc., which were likely gathered via subpoena from someone else's device. This lack of cooperation is particularly troubling because Lively continues to make serious claims, including financial loss and reputational harm, without offering any documentation to support them. Wayfair contends that she is using a double standard, demanding full transparency from the defendants while offering none in return. The mounting lack of evidence from Lively's side has further fueled the perception that she is avoiding scrutiny by stalling discovery and manipulating court proceedings. Wayfair's legal team accuses Blake Lively of engaging in deliberate delay tactics to avoid turning over documents, all while managing public perception through carefully timed legal filings. According to attorney Kevin Fritz, Wayfair had scheduled a meeting to discuss discovery issues, including her communications with Taylor Swift, but Lively filed her protective order just minutes before that meeting, effectively derailing the discussion. Wayfair asserts that this was a calculated move to avoid compliance and shift the focus to public relations. They argue that Lively's legal filings are being used less for legal defense and more as tools to generate press and control the narrative. Meanwhile, despite repeated requests dating back to February and March, she has yet to produce core documents tied to her allegations of misconduct and damages. Her attorneys also refuse to commit to a production timeline, only vaguely promising to turn materials over before the July 1st deadline. This behavior, Wayfair says, mirrors Lively's public pattern of accusing the defendants of stalling, when in reality, she's the one obstructing the process behind the scenes. Although Ryan Reynolds has been officially dismissed from Blake Lively's lawsuit, Wayfair argues that he continues to involve himself behind the scenes, particularly by pushing for information about media contacts and content creators. Wayfair points out that Lively is now using Reynolds' dismissed interrogatories to claim the defendants are non-compliant with discovery, even though he no longer has legal standing in the case. This tactic, according to Wayfair, is both irrelevant and improper, as it attempts to bypass legal protocol by invoking a non-party to demand privileged information. They also note the inconsistency in Lively's approach. Her team dismissed claims against Reynolds yet continues to rely on his prior motions and discovery demands to justify current complaints. Wayfair suggests that Reynolds may still be influencing the litigation strategy, despite no longer being a plaintiff or an active participant. This raises questions about whether Lively and her legal team are using dismissed claims as a pretext to keep pressuring defendants for off-limits information. The court is being urged to reject these efforts as procedural overreach and an abuse of discovery rules. In their most recent filings, Wayfair's legal team dismantles Blake Lively's ongoing public and legal narrative, accusing her of spreading misinformation and using court filings as a media tool. One major claim Lively pushed was that Wayfair was secretly using emails from her team without consent, an allegation Wayfair debunked by showing those accounts yielded no external access or hidden data. Her suggestion of a clandestine smear campaign is also being called out as baseless, especially since many of her own allegations, like Ryan Reynolds seeking content creator info, stem from parties who've already been dismissed. Wayfair underscores that Lively is demanding extensive transparency while producing virtually no documents of her own, failing to substantiate claims of reputational harm, emotional trauma, or financial loss. She identified Taylor Swift as a key witness in her own disclosures, then refused to turn over any of their communications despite previously claiming Swift was involved every step of the way. Wayfair insists that this contradictory behavior undermines her credibility and highlights a deliberate effort to control both the courtroom and the public conversation. As discovery deadlines approach, Lively's credibility is now under legal scrutiny. With a deposition scheduled soon and multiple motions filed to compel her full cooperation, the court will ultimately decide whether her protective order holds up or if her attempts to withhold evidence backfire. The growing evidence suggests that Lively's legal strategy may be collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions.